until someone replaces them, is actually appointed to replace them.
Now, can the governor, if the governor decides not to reappoint him, should it come back to the committee where we submit a name, or can the governor just reappoint someone else?
That's the question that's a little bit grayer area of the law. My suggestion at this point would be that the governor probably needs to take some action, whether he rejects it. And he doesn't have to take any action.
Because there's some qualified candidates before us that could fill that position.
Right. And my suggestion that I had suggested to Mr. LaPierre in terms of how the committee will handle this is, if a nominee is rejected, then probably this committee should adopt some procedure by which to move forward. The law really doesn't, it's silent as to what the procedure is that this committee follows if there is a rejection of a candidate. I think in the spirit of the law, you probably would go back to the procedure that's already in the law for the first time and go back through that procedure. Now, I think it would be within the discretion and the spirit of the statute for the committee here to take two actions. One would be simply to go back and look at the persons who have already submitted names and you've looked at and considered it, and maybe pick a new name from those candidates and resubmit that to the governor. Now, the committee could also, sort of in the spirit of the law, restart the nomination process, do a notice. I think as long as you're doing the notice within the limits of the statute, where you have that 30-day, you provide notice, public notice, and then you give 30 days before you make decisions, and you have to make it within 60 days. I think that procedure would be perfectly fine for the committee to follow, but I think it's in the discretion of this committee as to how they would proceed in that case, because the law really is silent, but I think part of looking at that would be to keep in the spirit of the law, which is the spirit of the law says that this committee should nominate people and give names to the governor from whom he makes appointments. Now, what he does with those names, that's, like I said, he can reject those names. He doesn't, at least our looking at the law, he doesn't even have to act on those things, which is kind of what's happened with Mr. Pineda at this point in time. But the law is real clear that the governor does, at least there's a case out there from the appellate courts, the First Circuit, which says that the governor cannot be forced to nominate somebody, no matter whether the law says that this committee only appoints one person. The governor, under the Constitution, has the appointment authority, and he can reject those appointments. And like I said, the law, after he does the rejection, it's kind of unclear how that would go, but I think in terms of keeping, my advice to this committee would be to adopt some procedure in the event something like that would happen that would be consistent with the procedure that's already in the statute for initially filling a vacancy. Kind of go back and read it. But I think you would have the option of picking from the names you already have. That might be a quicker process. Or going back through sort of this notice provision, taking new applications if you so desire. But I think it would be good for this committee to adopt that procedure to follow in the future, and also put it in writing to make sure that that's clear, that that's the procedure we'll follow under those circumstances. Because fortunately, the law is silent, and so you just sort of adopt from the law what you think would be in the spirit of the statute and the intent of the legislature.
So for today, no action.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note what David's saying, because I don't think this same situation for Pineda would apply to any new nominees we're making now, if I understand it right, because this is Pineda's second term. Yeah, if it were his first term, then his status would be quite different right now. Is that not right?
If he had not, if he was not already sitting on the board, then in terms of the status, let's say John Smith was sitting on the board before Mr. Pineda. John Smith would continue in that seat until someone was appointed for that seat, whether it would be Mr. Pineda or someone else. Right. But because Mr. Pineda was already sitting in that seat, he continued to serve. And he could be reappointed, and if he's confirmed by the Senate, then he would continue in his seat for a second term, where if somebody else is ultimately appointed, then that person would take that seat, and then Mr. Pineda would stop serving in the seat.
So is the same situation for Mr. Vieira also?
As I understand it, yeah, that's the
No,
So it's
so
exactly
no
the same.
action today on community.
Yeah. But basically what we have, they sit and they will sit, and maybe next meeting we come up with a procedure in case.
That's correct.
Let's come back. I think one way to do this will be to work the 4 lanes, make it tentative, work the next group, make it tentative, work, and then come back for final vote. So what we'll do is have discussions that aren't binding at this point, because I don't know how else to proceed with this. If someone has a different suggestion, happy to do it.
For completeness, back to Kelly McHugh.
Yeah.
He's a CEPE, so that means he qualified for the civil engineering spot, which we don't have, which we already have filled. He also is clearly science and engineering, so technical.
Yeah.
But he's owned his own firm since the mid-'80s. I think he would
So
also,
it'll also be a minute.
yeah,
Okay,
professional.
that's very good.
He's the, he's the principal engineer as well, correct?
He's got 2 businesses. Look at that. 2 of them. H2O Systems and Kelly McHugh.
He says Kelly McHugh, he has his work experience, Kelly McHugh and Associates, President, Civil Engineering, Land Surveying.
Yeah, then H2O Systems, he is president and general manager.
He's clearly managing a business. He's not just a consultant doing consulting. He's okay. Any nifty of concern you want to take a vote on this, or you all right?
I see it's
Yeah, 2 of them, a little confusing.
So we'll, if we need to, we can come back and revisit that, but for now, this guy fits all categories. So let's come back to New Orleans and have a tentative discussion. What I think we're going to do is say, do we have a top 2 or 3 list? And because we have some excellent candidates, unlike when we started, we've really seen the pool grow. Anyone want to begin? If you assume John Barry is one of those candidates, I will start and say that I also think that Hassinger is a highly qualified candidate, that Hornquist is a highly qualified candidate, and I would say that Marshall is, based on his history, is also a highly qualified candidate. Anyone want to make arguments for the others and know them? I either have done research or referencing to be confident about those.
Yeah, I know Harley fairly well. He's very, very competent engineer. Harley Weiner.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
According to my rating scheme, I would rate John Barry as the most qualified, Tornquist as the second most qualified, Mr. Hassinger is the third most qualified, and Mr. Marshall is the fourth qualified.
do you want to share with us the rating scheme? Or is
Well,
that-
the rating scheme is based on just a rating of the major points in the application itself. Licenses, certifications, work experience, education, veterans preference, professional organizations memberships, publications and expertise, and other evaluations.
Let me try and frame a little bit of what I think we ought to be sure we're having our conversation around. It's not simply about the qualifications of any given individual. It's about both the broad impact of an individual and how that person fits with the others and the skill set in order to make the board as effective as we can have the board. And that includes having the board be effective in context of the whole system, including all of what is now turned into a broader, a public political arena. So it's really about how we manage that whole piece and how we pick the candidate. So I do think that the history of us just putting, a good player on, then there's a danger not only of how does it fit with the qualifications, but it's also who has the most board experience, who has the experience to play with the kinds of problems that are most likely to be faced with this board now going forward. I think that's a fair way to put it. So again, I just don't want to overly, put, here's a rank that we think, matters.
Yeah, but I think it's an important point. I mean, I'm looking for the best person to do the best job. Now, we start off because it was put together to have high technical people involved. High technical people don't always make the best decisions. They do great in a specific field. And I think that's part of the discussion. I know from my perspective, I look for somebody that fills the qualifications. And then, what kind of decisions do they make with the gray areas? I mean, this just falls down to exactly some of the issues we're dealing with today. I know Gisette, are we going to discuss John's position and the works? I think it's a critical part of what we're here for. Is this a good time to talk about that?
Sure.
The pursuit of the lawsuit is a major decision. It's one of those gray areas. There's no doubt there's damage out there. We've seen it for years. But also the experience with lawsuits. I think both Tim and John told me they had no experience with lawsuits. Hadn't been involved in lawsuits. And that's an issue when you go into something this large and dealing with this. We had some same concerns with some of the things that are going on from my experience. We did something very similar. This was an offshore oil sale. And we sent a letter to the governor asking her to not go along with the oil sale, to object to it. And she answered back saying she didn't thought it was a good idea, that we do have damage, we should get a cost share, but that she didn't think we'd be successful. At that point, what we did is we formed an ad hoc committee in the Attorney General's office, and we started developing a case. I felt that to be successful in something like this large, we needed to have the whole political backing of the whole state. And not only that, there's also negotiations between state level, federal level, and maybe even some of the local levels. So we wanted to make sure we didn't cause problems for any other negotiations to lead in that direction. The ad hoc committee went along. We had Hurricane Katrina. There was another lease sale after that. And then the governor decided that she would do a TRO, a temporary restraining order. And again, the issue was to try to get some revenue. Again, that's just a different thing. We tried to bring in all the team members and all the people that would be affected by the lawsuit, because these are very broad effects that take place on this type of issue. And we felt it was at the governor's level and also at the level that everybody would have to be involved with and would have some effects. In other words, this pebble was going to make some big ripples. And this is very similar to this situation here. And in that discussion, 11 Board Association, we took a vote. I tried to get a compromise to give it out to the East Authority and the state so that maybe we could come out of this and be whole. That didn't work out. And in the discussions, a lot of people were very upset to be left out of this decision making. But I know that we appointed the Authority West, and one of the groups that was really upset, almost the most, was the Authority West. The same people we appoint on the other side doing the same issue. I know Giuseppe's here, I believe. What Giuseppe kind of mentioned, their perspective, because I think it's important, because they're the other side that we appoint. We appoint the west side also. Do you mind if Giuseppe would mention?
I think you can, as a member of the committee, I think you can invite any comment if you feel that you want something made, that's fine.
Yeah, well, I would like to.
I think it's good enough to just say that this was something that the West felt.
Well, again, we appoint the West also, and they had a different perspective on what took place, and I think it's important for us to see what their side of this discussion is. If you don't mind, Giuseppe.
I'm okay with it. Anyone with that? Go ahead, Giuseppe.
Hello, my name is Giuseppe Mitrandino. I am the Regional Director of the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority West. Thanks, Mr. Wendell, for mentioning my name. Also, I want to thank the committee for all the hard work that's being done. The chairman, yourself, and other members, and specifically the guys I work with on the West End, for what they've done. I've been in the business for 23 plus years. I was fairly young when I started. And the comment that Mr. LaPierre made is probably the most important thing that was said today, is a balance and a mix. being with the old type of boards that was non-professional, they served a great purpose. We had great board members, they did a great job. And when this committee came in and made it more professional, in the beginning it was weighed very heavily with engineers, and you never really got a good mix, and there was a perception out there that we was doing more engineering than managing. And it was very bumpy in the beginning because there was a lot of training and educating to get them to understand, just like you said, Mr. LaPierre, that you have to have a mix, you know, a lawyer, a CPA, engineers, business people, because they bring different things and different facets to the table. And I'll just give you an example. Mr. Dolphin, who y'all just put through, he is a public relations gentleman. When all this stuff went over with the oil field, we relied on Mr. Dolphin and Ms. Susan McClay, our president, because they had a lot of public relations stuff and they brought a lot to the table. So I just wanted to mention that, and I'm very grateful for that. Secondly, as Mr. Wendell said, is Sulphur West's board is very concerned about this lawsuit. We found out about the lawsuit same time as everybody when they opened up the newspaper. And the ALVL, which we sit on, and Mr. Wendell suggested, we voted against it because they did not communicate to any of us what was going on. Now, I don't know if this is something this board needs to understand or don't understand, but one thing I do need to understand is for us to succeed and have coastal protection and hurricane protection, we have to be a cohesive group of people, all working together, going down the same road at the same time. You can't have 3 leaders. You have to have 1 leader. And the people of Louisiana voted in 2006 to name CPRA as the one voice for the state of Louisiana for coastal protection and restoration. They flat out did it. And if people remember my name, I was adamantly opposed to it in 2005 and 2006. I think Mr. Wendell knows that. And you have to have a mix, and you have to be able to work and move together with people at one time. To leave us out in the dark and to leave the state out in the dark was, in my opinion, not a very wise thing to do, nor do I could say some of my board members feel adamant about it. So any consideration, I support Wendell in that you have to move together. And if you send people up that aren't moving together, you're only going to hurt flood protection and coastal restoration. That's all I have to say. I want to give my opinion, because I am a very opinionated person. But thank you for the opportunity to say
Appreciate it.
something.
Thank you. Wendell, anything else, sir?
Well, no, again, it gets just across, to me, being a board member is to be able to not just have and know the science, it's how to apply the science, and then also to apply good logic decision-making on large issues. Now, one of the points from our view, we are much more affected, I think, by the oil field work and the land loss and the Gulf getting closer to us where we're located. Yet, at the same time, we don't look at the oil industry as being something separate. They are part of us, and the lawsuits seem to attack the industry instead of a particular thing. Now, I want everybody to know here, I've been sued personally by an oil field company, okay? Because when they do wrong things, we're going to go after them, and when they do right things, we're going to take their taxes and pat them on the back and be real happy about what they do. So when we looked at this lawsuit, it was, again, from my experience, there were 2 lawsuits in Terrebonne Parish that failed because they looked too ovular at just attacking the damage. There was 1 lawsuit I'm familiar in Lafourche Parish that had some success, but it was on a particular project, a particular EIS that took place, and they had some success. I think the approach of the lawsuit and the attack on the whole industry, and also going so far back, and if you look at the law, it says about doing the best you can in the circumstance. What those other 2 cases in Terrebonne were saying, that was the accepted practice. If you couldn't make it perfect, well, that was what they did the best you could. That was accepted. Now, if we change as a society and say, no, it has to be pristine and exact alike, that's fine. But that's part of the concern is that if I choose to go to court, I don't want to have a loss for another agency out there and have a loss decision on a lawsuit. I want something that I can gain if I decide to do it when someone does do something wrong that we see. And that's been the discussion with both John Barrett and Tim Duty, are personal friends of mine. I've been working with them since they started. We sit together side by side on CPRA. The decision here, I don't think was the best decision to move forward with this suit, because if you're going to do it, you want to win. I don't think it was set up to do that properly. But the other thing is, if you're going to affect a lot of people, bring them in the huddle, and you make a decision from that. I think they felt that the governor was not going to support it, and for that reason, they moved forward with it. So, and I think that's important decision-making on this level. Just like the old board makes some pretty bad decisions, for sometimes the wrong reasons, but maybe good intent, but the wrong reasons. I think that's what we need to look at.
There are a lot of ways we can slice this one. We tried to say, well, we're simply going to look at the candidates. But the truth is, as we look at this, we have to look at the candidates in terms of how they fit with the board and how they'll deal with the future challenges. It's part of what we say. I don't think we need to get into the merits or demerits of the lawsuit, because I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about the lawsuit, I'll tell you that. And I didn't come here to debate the lawsuit. I came here to serve on the nominating committee.
Yeah.
And so I personally feel more comfortable talking about the qualifications of the candidates and not second guessing them once they're on the board. I don't know, was this vote, and again, I don't know anything about the lawsuit, but am I correct, wasn't the vote unanimous? So all of the people we nominated for this board are all wrong?
Well, let me make an observation.
If we're going to do this to one or two of the individuals that we nominated, I mean, do we have to go back and second guess? John Berry and Tim Duty are two people that we nominated for this board. They are very, very qualified. Nothing has changed their qualifications. Now, whatever their action is, I guess that's their vote, that's their decision, and people have to argue it one way or the other. But as a member of the nominating committee, I guess I'm not here to vote on the lawsuit. I'm here to vote on the candidate.
Well, I'll give it back because it's judgment. The key thing is, and again, we talked about that before. When I'm looking to get somebody on, I look at qualifications. But the main thing is their judgment.
He's an incredibly accomplished.
There's no argument. They're a good friend.
Let's try and keep some structure to this and have not a back and forth. But anyone else want to comment on this?
But just like Nick said, all members that were on the East Board voted in favor of the lawsuit. That's what I appreciate.
That's true. And let me give an anecdote so you'll know. Alfred Sloan, who founded GM, or at least was one of the early managers in GM, he used to say, whenever it's unanimous, we tell everybody to go away and come back because we don't understand the issue well enough. We're going to have a deeper conversation. And I think there's the question for us is there a dynamic where we have true independent thinking and challenge going on, but all that was done without any public discussion. So we don't know what that would be. But that's certainly one of the possibilities that occurred, that some people dominated in that setting and the others went along. And as the point was made, and there's no one in there who has a legal background, and no one in there who would have experience with litigation at this kind of level. So that's all part of the soup. I'm not trying to frame it any other way, just say it's all part of the soup we have to deal with. Okay? Any other comments? Again, back to getting a Robert.
I agree with Nick that we need to look at this from a nomination standpoint mainly, but at the same time, anytime you have a new round of election, a public official or anyone else, it's a new round, and there's a lot of good competitors in here, and it should be subject to incumbents being placed up against the other candidates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think there's any doubt that but for the lawsuit, John would probably be, a shoe in. I mean that. So that's the elephant in the room in this. Again, without taking a vote, if we said how do we want to frame this? Do we want to frame it as a slate? If I said, with or without John Barry, let's start with John Barry. Is there a second that you put in? For me personally, I would say if John Barry were presented, then Hassinger would be my choice.
I would say it would be Barry and Marshall. I'm not, Hassinger is concerned. It seems to me that Hassinger's biggest qualification here is that he's on the non-flood protection asset. Is that correct?
He's on that authority, correct?
I would say doggy on
Well, again, you're back to the mix of the technical. They have a major political. There's no possibility of escaping that they are in the political world. They are totally right front and center. And anyone see a way that this board will not be in the political arena, including legislation at the legislative session that will be to unravel what we have. And that's just where it's going to be. It will be legislative. Rick, Tom?
In that context, I can't pronounce it, Marshall
Yeah.
is the CEO. Hassinger and Weiner all look fine to me. In the context of the way you asked the question. That was, one was already said.
I mean, if I understand your question, Jay, it's, if this is going to be a professional, so Weiner and Hornquist are not either one of them is in the run if this is a professional seat, correct?
Well, we have the technical overlay we have to make on this, but then we have to say who's going to be effective in dealing with what is the new world in this game. Because this new world is not about them managing their management. It's about a very different game going forward. We can figure out how to stay alive after the legislative session. I don't know an easy way to avoid that problem. We're going to end up taking votes. Do you have a different slate? Anyone have different slates? I think we'll take votes in a minute, but we ought to.
But we have to provide two positions.
If we're going two, and we're saying Barry is in, I was asking, assume Barry is in, I was about to assume Barry wasn't. I was saying if Barry is in, Hassinger would be my second, and then someone else say, well, if Barry is in, someone, here's my second. You said Tornquist, but again, Tornquist, I look and go, given that he's phenomenally qualified, it's clearly way above the chart. A true scientist and expert would be an extremely valuable resource, but I don't think he's a guy I would say is going to help that board with respect to the world that we in.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
You don't know that?
Yep.
Well, we have a,
No, I mean the non-technical side. Of what
Correct,
they're
on the
doing.
non-technical side.
Yeah,
But he's really a
Marshall's been around the
world-renowned
block.
expert as a resource that will
Hornquist
speak
is a
independently.
woman. Exactly.
To say he wouldn't contribute to the board moving forward, I'm not sure I'm there yet with that.
Repeat that, Rick?
To say that he may not be able to contribute to the board in a meaningful way moving forward, given the context, I'm just not sure I'm there.
No,
with that
no,
comment.
make sure I'm not.
No, just for the political side.
If
It's
you're,
really about
That's new world that's gonna
best
happen.
contribute with respect to what is going to be a clear gap. This board clearly has a gap. And we can't lay on that. That's all I mean, not.